It all started on a Tuesday, under the oppressive glare of stage lights that made the whole world smell like warm dust and electricity. I was standing on a stage, my hands clutching a heavy, lucite award that felt both momentous and utterly alien. It was the culmination of a decade of my life, countless sleepless nights, failed experiments, and the kind of single-minded focus that leaves little room for anything else. Chloe Vance, a molecular biologist who had spent more time with Petri dishes than people, had just been awarded the prestigious Atherton Grant. It was a sum of money that felt unreal, a figure with so many zeros it looked like a typo. It meant my research into degenerative neurological diseases, the work I had poured my soul into, was not only validated but was about to be fully funded for the next 5 years. The applause was a roaring sea, a wave of anonymous approval that washed over me. I smiled, a carefully constructed expression I had practiced in the hotel mirror, hoping it conveyed gratitude and humility. But behind the smile, my mind was a frantic calculator. I was scanning the cavernous auditorium, my eyes darting through the sea of well-dressed strangers. I was looking for them, my family. My mother, my father, and my sister, Amelia. I had sent them the invitations months ago, first-class plane tickets, a suite at the hotel where the ceremony was being held. I had made it so easy, so impossibly simple for them to just show up. I had pictured this moment, imagined their faces in the crowd. My mother dabbing her eyes with a tissue, my father puffing out his chest with a pride he rarely showed. Even Amelia, my effervescent, perpetually adored younger sister, offering a brilliant smile and a thumbs up. But the 3 seats I had reserved in the 3rd row, prime viewing spots, were brutally, unequivocally empty. They weren't just empty, they felt like voids, tiny black holes sucking all the joy out of my triumph. As I walked off the stage, the heavy award in my hands, a colleague I barely knew, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man with a kind, crinkly smile, clapped me on the shoulder. "Incredible work, Chloe, truly groundbreaking. Your family must be over the moon." I felt a familiar, hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I just nodded, the practiced smile pasted back on my face. "Thank you, Eris. Yes, they're very proud." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Later that night, at the formal dinner, I sat at a table with giants of my field. They talked about cellular decay and protein folding, and I contributed, my voice steady, my arguments sound. But I was a ghost at the feast. I kept checking my phone, which lay face down on the white tablecloth. Nothing, not a single text, not a missed call. The silence from them was louder than the standing ovation I had received hours earlier. It was a silence I knew well. It was the same silence that had filled the auditorium at my PhD defense, the same silence that had greeted the news of my first published paper in a major scientific journal. It was a silence curated and perfected over 29 years, a constant, humming reminder of my place in the family ecosystem. I was the sturdy, reliable oak tree in the backyard, always there, providing shade, but never the main attraction. Amelia, she was the prize-winning rose bush in the front garden, demanding constant attention, admiration, and care. And our parents were the dedicated gardeners, their hands always tending to her delicate petals. I finally excused myself, walking out onto the hotel balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air was a relief. I looked at the sprawling galaxy of lights below and felt a profound sense of loneliness. I had achieved everything I had ever set out to do, reached the pinnacle of my professional life. So why did I feel like a little girl who had just built a magnificent sandcastle, only to look around and realize she was completely alone on the beach? That night, holding that award in my empty hotel suite, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like an orphan. 2 days later, the silence was finally broken. My phone buzzed on my lab bench, rattling against a stack of research papers. The screen lit up with a picture of my sister, Amelia. It was a professionally shot photo of her laughing, her blonde hair catching the sunlight perfectly. For a moment, a foolish, hopeful spark ignited in my chest. Maybe this is it, I thought. Maybe she's finally calling to congratulate me. I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Hi, Leah." "Chloe, oh my God, I have the most amazing news." Her voice was a whirlwind of breathless excitement, the way it always was when the universe had arranged itself to her liking. There was no, "How are you?" No, congratulations on the biggest achievement of your life. It was a conversational dive straight into the deep end of her world. What is it? I asked, my hope already deflating. Jason proposed, she shrieked, and I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Last night, it was so romantic, Chloe. He took me to that rooftop place with the fairy lights, and he got down on one knee, and the ring, oh, you have to see the ring. It's a princess cut, just like I told him. I leaned against the cool metal of my workbench. Of course, her news had to eclipse mine. A proposal versus a grant that could potentially change the lives of millions. In the economy of our family's attention, there was no contest. Wow, Leah, that's great news. Congratulations, I said, the words feeling stiff and foreign in my mouth. I was trying to be happy for her. I truly was. But my own triumph felt so fresh, and the wound of my family's indifference was still so raw that her joy felt like salt being rubbed into it. I know, right? She breezed on, completely oblivious to my tone. We're already thinking about the wedding. We want to do it next fall. A destination wedding. Maybe somewhere in Tuscany. Imagine the pictures. I listened for 10 minutes as she painted a vibrant picture of her dream wedding. She spoke of a restored Italian villa, of string quartets and catering by a Michelin star chef, of a custom-made designer gown. It was a fantasy spun from bridal magazines and celebrity Instagram feeds. I listened, making the appropriate murmuring sounds of interest, while my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the empty seats. Then she paused, taking a breath, and the tone of her voice shifted. It became a little more serious, a little more businesslike. So anyway, she said, the casualness of it a carefully sharpened weapon. Jason and I were running the numbers, and a wedding like this is obviously, you know, it's a lot. I stayed silent. I knew what was coming. I had known since the moment I answered the phone. This wasn't just a call to share good news. It was a summons, it was an invoice. And then we saw the news about your big award thingy, she continued. The term award thingy, a casual dismissal of my entire life's work. That grant money, it's like perfect timing, right? It's a sign. My hand tightened on the phone. My lab, which seconds before had been my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. The hum of the refrigerators, the rhythmic beep of the sequencers, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. What are you saying, Amelia? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Well, she said, and I could almost hear the shrug in her voice, the entitled, thoughtless assumption that had been the background music of my entire life. I mean, it's a lot of money, right? And you don't really have anyone to spend it on. We're family. Jason and I were just thinking, you know, you could help us out. Pay for the wedding. It would be my dream come true. You'd be making my dream come true, Chloe. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A declaration. The unspoken contract of our sisterhood, as defined by her and my parents, was being laid bare on the table. My purpose, in their eyes, was to facilitate her happiness. My success was not my own. It was a resource for the family, to be allocated to its most important asset, Amelia. And for the first time in my life, a cold, hard knot of something that wasn't sadness, but pure, unadulterated rage began to form in the pit of my stomach. Her words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. You'd be making my dream come true. As if her dreams were the only ones that had ever mattered. The rage in my stomach was a cold, coiling thing, but it was familiar. It was an old friend I hadn't seen in a while. It transported me back in time to the sticky, humid gymnasium of Northwood Middle School. I was 12 years old. I was standing next to a trifold poster board covered in meticulous, hand-drawn diagrams of plant cell mitosis. My project, The Secret Life of the Lima Bean, had just won first place at the district science fair. I had spent 2 months on it, carefully germinating beans in different light conditions, recording their growth in a logbook with a seriousness that bordered on obsessive. My teacher, Mr. Albright, had told me my project was high school level. I was vibrating with a pride so intense it felt like my teeth were humming. I had a blue ribbon pinned to my shirt, and a small, gold-painted trophy sat on my presentation table. I kept looking towards the gymnasium doors, expecting to see my parents. They had promised. "We'll be there, sweetie," my mother had said, her voice distracted as she helped Amelia glue sequins onto a pink leotard. Right after Leah's recital. Amelia's dance recital was the same afternoon. It wasn't a competition, just a mid-season showcase for her ballet class. She was 10, and she was one of 8 little swans in a slightly clumsy, but admittedly cute, performance of a simplified Swan Lake. I stood by my lima beans for 2 hours. I watched other parents come and go, ruffling their kids' hair, taking pictures of them with their ribbons. The gym slowly emptied out. The janitor started sweeping up stray glitter and popcorn. The principal gave me a sympathetic smile as he locked up the trophy case. By the time my parents' car finally pulled up to the curb, the sun was setting. They got out, and Amelia was between them, holding a bouquet of grocery store carnations. She was still in her tutu. "Sorry we're late, honey," my dad said, not looking at my ribbon but at his watch. "Leah was just spectacular. You should have seen her, the star of the show." "We just had to take her out for ice cream to celebrate," my mom added, beaming at Amelia. "Did you have fun?" She glanced at my project, her eyes skating over the charts and diagrams without really seeing them. "Oh, that's nice, Chloe. Lima beans." My first place trophy felt like a lead weight in my hands. The blue ribbon felt like a brand. I remember looking from their glowing faces, still flushed from celebrating Amelia, to my wilting bean sprouts under the fluorescent lights, and I understood something fundamental that day. My achievements were quiet, solitary things. They were lima beans. Amelia's were carnations and tutus and ice cream. My victories were footnotes, hers were headlines. That 12-year-old girl was still inside me, standing there in my lab, phone pressed to my ear. And she was furious. "Chloe, are you there? Did you hear me?" Amelia's voice, chirpy and insistent, pulled me back to the present. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the sterile, antiseptic smell of the lab filling my lungs. "I heard you, Leah," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "You want me to use my grant money to pay for your destination wedding in Tuscany." "Yes, exactly," she said, relieved, as if the only possible obstacle was a bad connection. "Wouldn't it be amazing? It would be the perfect wedding gift." The word gift struck me as absurd. A gift is something given freely, from a place of affection. This felt like a tax, a tariff levied on my success. I began to pace the narrow aisle between the lab benches, the rubber soles of my shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum. For my entire life, I had operated on a flawed equation. I had believed that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, became successful enough, I would eventually earn their attention. I thought love and approval were commodities that could be acquired through merit. If I got a perfect report card, maybe they'd put it on the fridge next to Amelia's finger paintings. If I won a scholarship, maybe they'd mention it at a dinner party. If I earned a PhD, maybe they'd finally see me as an equal to the sister, whose greatest accomplishment was being effortlessly charming. But I was wrong. It was never a meritocracy. My successes were not assets to be celebrated, they were liabilities. They made them uncomfortable. They highlighted the fact that I didn't need them in the same way Amelia did. I was self-sufficient, quiet, and content in my own world of research and data. I was a closed system. Amelia was a beautiful, chaotic whirlwind, constantly needing support, advice, money, and attention. She made them feel needed. She made them feel like parents. I just made them feel confused. "Leah," I started, choosing my words with the same precision I used to calibrate a microscope. "The Atherton grant, it's not a lottery win. It's not found money. It's for my research. It's for equipment, for hiring a research assistant, for funding the next 5 years of my work." There was a beat of silence on her end. "But it's your money, right? They give it to you. You can do what you want with it." "That's not how it works," I tried to explain, though I knew it was hopeless. "There are budgets and proposals and ethical guidelines, and more importantly, this is my career. It's my life's work. It's not a wedding fund." Her voice turned petulant, the sunny warmth instantly replaced by a chilly frost. "I don't understand why you have to be so difficult about this. It's just money. Family is more important than work." And there it was, the foundational belief of their entire universe. Family is more important, but what they meant was, we are more important. Your role in the family is to serve our needs. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The conversation with Amelia ended badly. She had dissolved into frustrated tears, accusing me of being selfish and unsupportive before hanging up on me. I stood in the quiet of my lab for a long time, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry insect. I felt drained, as if she had siphoned all the energy out of me through the phone line. I knew it wasn't over. Amelia was just the scout, the first wave sent to test the defenses. The main army was still to come. I didn't have to wait long. The next evening, my father called. Dad was a man of few words, a retired accountant who saw the world in spreadsheets and bottom lines. He wasn't emotional or demonstrative, but he was the enforcer. When my mother's guilt trips failed, he would step in with his quiet, unyielding logic. "Chloe," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. It was the same tone he used when he was about to tell me I'd miscalculated my taxes. "Your mother and I spoke with Amelia. She's very upset." "I'm sure she is," I said, my back stiffening. I was sitting in my small apartment, a stack of unread journals on the table beside me. "She told us about your reluctance to help with the wedding," he said, the word reluctance dripping with disapproval. "I have to say I'm disappointed." Disappointed. That was his go-to weapon. Not anger, not shouting, just the quiet, heavy blanket of his disappointment. It had been incredibly effective when I was younger, a weight I would do anything to shrug off. Now it just felt manipulative. "Dad, it's not a reluctance," I explained, trying once again to make them understand. "The grant has a purpose. It's for my research that could help people. I can't just use it to fund a party, no matter how lavish." "Don't be dramatic, Chloe," he sighed, a sound I knew well. It was the sound of him dismissing my passions as silly hobbies. "It's not just a party, it's your sister's wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, and that money is more than you could ever need. We raised you to understand the importance of family. When one person has good fortune, they share it. That's how it works." His version of family was a one-way street. I thought about all the times I had needed them, the times I had good fortune to share, the science fair, my graduation, this award. They weren't just absent, they were willfully blind to it. My good fortune only registered on their radar when it could be liquidated and transferred to Amelia's account. The conversation with my father was a dead end, a circular argument that left me exhausted and unheard. The next day, as expected, my mother called. She was the emotional heart of their operation, the master of the guilt trip, the purveyor of passive aggression. "Chloe, darling," she started, her voice syrupy sweet, a clear sign she was about to go on the attack. "I'm so worried about you. You sound so stressed. Is all that work getting to you?" "I'm fine, Mom," I said, bracing myself. "It's just that your sister is heartbroken," she continued, her voice trembling with manufactured sadness. "She had this beautiful dream, and she thought you would be the one to help her. You were always so sensible, the responsible one. We always knew we could count on you." And there it was, my role neatly defined. I was the responsible one. The safety net, the backup plan. Amelia got to have dreams, and I was the one who was supposed to be sensible enough to fund them. I was the Federal Reserve Bank of Chloe, and my sister had just submitted a request for a massive bailout. "Mom, this isn't about being responsible," I said, my patience wearing thin. "This is about my career, my life. The grant is an honor, but it's also a responsibility. I have a responsibility to the foundation that gave it to me and to the scientific community." "Oh, Chloe, don't be so stuffy," she tusked. "The scientific community will be fine, but your family needs you. Your sister needs you. After everything we've done for you, the lessons, the schooling, we gave you every opportunity to succeed. Is it too much to ask that you give a little back, that you help your sister have the one day she's always dreamed of? You owe us this, Chloe. You owe us this." The 5 words landed like stones in my stomach. Owed them. I thought back over my life, trying to find the debt she was referring to. Yes, they had fed me and clothed me and housed me. They had performed the basic, legally required duties of parenting. But the things a child truly needs, support, validation, attention, the feeling of being seen, those were things I had never received from them. I had raised myself, emotionally speaking. I had been my own cheerleader, my own comfort, my own advocate. I had put myself through graduate school with a combination of scholarships, teaching assistantships, and late-night waitressing jobs. What exactly did I owe them? The question hung in my mind, stark and terrifying. If I didn't owe them this, then what was the foundation of our relationship? If it wasn't built on a debt I was meant to repay, then what was it built on? I was beginning to suspect the answer was nothing at all. My mother's words, "We gave you every opportunity," echoed in my head long after the call ended. An image flared in my mind, sharp and painful. My high school graduation. I was the valedictorian. I had worked relentlessly for 4 years to be at the top of my class. It wasn't just about the grades. It was about proving something, though I wasn't sure to whom. Maybe to myself. I had spent weeks on my speech, a carefully crafted message about an H.G. Wells quote. We must not allow the clock and the calendar to blind us to the fact that each moment of life is a miracle and a mystery. It was about appreciating the small wonders, the cellular-level magic of existence. It was, in retrospect, a very Chloe speech. The graduation ceremony was on a sweltering Saturday in June. My parents had promised to be there, in the front row. But that morning, Amelia, who was then a junior, got a call. A local department store at the mall was having a back-to-school fashion show, and one of the amateur models had dropped out. They needed a replacement. Amelia, with her photogenic smile and natural confidence, was a perfect fit. To my parents, this was a massive opportunity, a potential big break. They saw runways and magazine covers in their future. My graduation, a predictable academic ceremony, suddenly seemed dull and unimportant by comparison. "Chloe, you understand, don't you, sweetie?" my mother had said, her hands fluttering as she helped Amelia with her makeup. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for your sister. We have to be there to support her. Your graduation is just, you walk up, you get a piece of paper," my father had added, already grabbing his car keys. "We'll be there in spirit." So I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of proud families. I found the seats where mine were supposed to be. They were empty. I delivered my speech about miracles and mysteries to a sea of strangers, my voice clear and steady, while inside a part of me was crumbling. I remember walking off the stage, my principal shaking my hand vigorously, telling me it was the best valedictory speech he'd heard in 20 years. Later, I saw a photo in the local paper. It was of Amelia, posing awkwardly on a makeshift runway in the mall's center court, wearing a brightly colored backpack. The caption called her an up-and-coming local model. That night, my parents talked about nothing else. My valedictorian plaque sat on the kitchen counter, gathering dust, next to a pile of mail. The debt I supposedly owed them felt like a phantom, an accounting error in the ledger of our lives. The pressure campaign was relentless. It was a coordinated, three-front war. Amelia would text me photos of wedding venues from the internet, with captions like, "This could be ours." My father would send me clipped, passive-aggressive emails with links to financial advice articles about the joys of philanthropic giving, as if funding his daughter's extravagant party was a noble, charitable act. And my mother would call, her voice always laced with a carefully curated disappointment, telling me how all her friends were asking about the wedding and how she didn't know what to say. They were trying to build a cage of expectations around me, bar by gilded bar. They were defining my reality for me, casting me in a role I had never auditioned for. The ungrateful daughter, the selfish sister, the cold-hearted scientist who cared more for microbes than for her own family. For a few days, I let it get to me. I started to doubt myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was this, as they claimed, just what families do? The weight of their combined expectations was immense, a physical pressure in my chest. I had spent my entire life trying to be small, to not cause trouble, to not need anything from them. This ingrained habit of capitulation was a powerful force. Maybe it would just be easier to give in. To write the check, buy the piece, and go back to being their invisible, reliable daughter. I found myself looking at my bank account online. The first installment of the grant money was there. It was a staggering number. Looking at it, I didn't feel powerful. I felt sick. Because I knew that to them, that number wasn't the key to unlocking the mysteries of the human brain. It was the price tag for a Vera Wang gown and catering for 200 people. I felt myself starting to drift, pulled under by the familiar tide of their will. I was so used to being the supporting character in their story that I was forgetting how to be the main character in my own. I was losing the righteous, clear-eyed anger I had felt, and it was being replaced by a familiar, weary resignation. That's when I made a phone call, the one I should have made weeks ago. Dr. Eris Thorne wasn't just a colleague. He had been my mentor during my postdoctoral fellowship. He was a man in his late 60s, with a brilliant mind and a surprising capacity for empathy, a rare combination in our field. He had been the one who encouraged me to apply for the Atherton grant in the first place. He saw something in my work, and in me, that I often failed to see in myself. More importantly, Eris was the closest thing I had to a supportive parental figure. We met for coffee at a small cafe near the university. I laid out the whole sordid story, from the empty chairs at the ceremony to my mother's final, crushing words. "You owe us this." As I spoke, I felt a familiar shame, as if their behavior was a reflection of some failing on my part. Eris listened patiently, his hands wrapped around his mug, his gaze unwavering. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, the whole ugly mess hanging in the air between us, he was silent for a long moment. "Chloe," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "In our line of work, we deal with evidence. We form hypotheses based on observation and data. We don't cling to a theory when all the evidence points to the contrary." "Correct." I nodded. "Correct. For 29 years, your working hypothesis has been that if you achieve enough, you will earn your family's love and respect. You have gathered an overwhelming amount of data. The science fair, your graduation, this grant, that proves this hypothesis is false." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Your family does not see your success as your own. They see it as a family resource that has been inconveniently allocated to the wrong subsidiary. They are attempting a hostile takeover of your life's work. The debt you feel you owe them is not real. It is an invention, a tool of control. True familial support is not a transaction. It's a constant. It's the people who show up." His words were like a clean, sharp scalpel, cutting through the fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded my mind. He was applying the logic of our profession to the chaos of my life, and it was breathtakingly, devastatingly clear. He was right. I had been clinging to a failed hypothesis for years, trying to force the data to fit my desired conclusion. "So what do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You formulate a new hypothesis," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "And then you design an experiment to test it. You've been given an extraordinary sum of money, a king's ransom. Their assumption is that its only value is monetary. You know better. A grant like that isn't just money. It's power. The power to create, to build, to change things. The question is, what do you want to build?" I left that cafe with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in my entire life. The anger was back, but it wasn't the hot, reactive rage I had felt before. It was a cold, clean, focused energy. The weary resignation was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Eris was right. It was time for a new experiment. The next 2 weeks were a blur of focused activity. I channeled all the energy I had been wasting on anxiety and anger into a new project. I met with lawyers. I met with the university's philanthropic development office. I met with financial planners. I was meticulous. I was relentless. I was a scientist designing the most important experiment of her life. My family, meanwhile, interpreted my silence as a sign of imminent surrender. They stopped the daily pressure campaign, confident that I was coming to my senses. Amelia even sent me a cheerful text with a link to a Pinterest board titled "Our Tuscan Dream," filled with pictures of lace and peonies. They thought they had won. They thought the weight of their expectations had finally crushed me into compliance. They had no idea that I wasn't being crushed. I was being forged. I was building something that would be the ultimate answer to their demands. It was a response so complete, so definitive that it would leave no room for argument. It wasn't just going to be a no. A no was a negotiation, an invitation for more guilt, more pressure. This was going to be a full stop. a period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. My plan was twofold. First, I needed to officially and legally protect my research and the grant money, ensuring it could only be used for its intended purpose. The university's lawyers helped me draft ironclad documents that ring-fence the funds, creating a dedicated research endowment in my name. The money was no longer just in my account. It was part of an institution, untouchable. But that was just the defensive measure. The second part of the plan was the real answer. It was the psychological masterstroke. I took a significant portion of my own personal savings, money I had painstakingly accumulated over years of frugal living, and I used it to establish a new foundation. I spent hours crafting the mission statement, defining its purpose. It was a scholarship fund. A fund specifically for promising young women from low-income backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And the name of the foundation, that was the final, perfect piece. I named it the Albright Initiative, after Mr. Albright, the middle school science teacher who had seen a spark in a lonely 12-year-old girl and her Lima Bean project. He was the one who had shown up. He was the one who deserved the honor. Once everything was in place, the documents signed, the accounts established, the press release for the university website drafted, I did one last thing. I called my parents. I told them I had made my decision about the wedding, and I wanted to tell them and Amelia in person. I suggested dinner. At Lucille, the most expensive, exclusive restaurant in the city. The one my mother had been dropping hints about for years. They took the bait. Their victory, they assumed, would be celebrated in style. Driving to the restaurant, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind drifted to another memory of their absence. It was my college move-in day. I'd gotten into a prestigious university 4 states away on a near-full academic scholarship. It was the biggest day of my young life, the first real step into my own future. My parents drove me to the campus. The place was buzzing with energy, cars overflowing with boxes, excited students hugging their tearful parents, the palpable thrum of new beginnings. My parents, however, treated it like a delivery service drop-off. They helped me carry my 2 suitcases and 1 box of books to my tiny, sterile dorm room. "Well, this is it," my father said, looking at his watch. "We've got a long drive back. We need to get going." "We want to miss the traffic," my mom added, her eyes already distant. "And we promised Amelia we'd help her paint her new bedroom this weekend. She wants it to be seafoam green, whatever that is." Amelia was a sophomore in high school. Her bedroom painting project was, in their minds, an event of equal or greater importance than leaving their other daughter 400 miles from home for the first time. They gave me a quick, awkward hug. There were no tears, no lingering words of wisdom, no "we're so proud of you." Just a perfunctory, "call us if you need anything," and then they were gone. I stood in the doorway of my empty room and watched them walk down the hall without looking back. I could hear other families in nearby rooms laughing, arguing playfully over where to put a poster, parents making one last trip to the store for forgotten essentials. The hallway was full of the sounds of connection, of loving farewells. My room was silent. That evening, I ate my first dinner as a college student alone in the cacophonous dining hall, watching other freshmen surrounded by their families. That was the day I truly understood. I was not a project to be nurtured. I was a problem that had been solved. I was self-sufficient, I was taken care of, and I was off their hands. Their work was done. Now they could get back to the real work, tending to Amelia. Remembering that day, sitting in my car outside the fancy restaurant, didn't make me sad anymore. It clarified things. It sharpened my resolve. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for the quiet, lonely 18-year-old girl who had unpacked her life all by herself. Lucille was even more opulent than I had imagined. It was a hushed temple of gastronomy, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and waiters who moved with the silent grace of ballerinas. My family was already there when I arrived, seated at a prime table by the large window overlooking the city. They looked like they belonged. My father in his best suit looked stern and important. My mother was wearing a new dress and too much jewelry, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. And Amelia was radiant. She was glowing with the certainty of a dream about to be realized. She practically vibrated with excitement. "Chloe, there you are," my mother trilled, offering her cheek for a kiss. It felt as dry as paper. "We ordered a bottle of champagne to celebrate," my father announced, as if the conclusion was foregone. I sat down, the plush velvet of the chair sinking beneath me. For a moment, I saw us as strangers might, a successful, well-dressed family out for a celebratory dinner, a perfect picture. But I knew the truth. We were a collection of unmet needs and unspoken resentments, held together by a fragile web of obligation. So, Amelia leaned forward, her eyes sparkling, unable to contain herself any longer. "Dad said you made a decision. You're going to do it, aren't you? You're going to make my dream come true." I looked at her, at this sister I had known my whole life but who had never really known me. I saw the genuine, unadulterated excitement in her eyes, and I realized, with a startling pang of clarity, that she wasn't being malicious. She was simply a product of her environment. She had been taught from birth that the world revolved around her. She had been raised to believe that her desires were paramount. In her mind, my success was a windfall for her, and she wasn't being greedy. She was just accepting a gift the universe had obviously intended for her. It was a stunning, breathtaking level of entitlement, but it was as natural to her as breathing. "Before we get to that," I said, my voice calm and even, "let's order. I want to hear all about your plans for the wedding, every single detail." This was the right move. Their guards dropped completely. They saw my question as a prelude to capitulation. They thought I was immersing myself in the fantasy I was about to purchase. For the next hour, I let them talk, and they did. It was the most they had ever spoken to me in my entire life. It was like watching a performance. Amelia took the lead, her hands gesturing gracefully as she described her vision. My mother chimed in with suggestions about flower arrangements and color palettes. My father, ever the accountant, talked about logistics and guest lists, but even he had a sort of grim satisfaction in his voice, as if he were managing the finances of a major corporation. They talked about flying in a specific photographer from Paris. They discussed a 5-course meal with wine pairings for 200 guests. Amelia detailed the pre-wedding events, a welcome dinner for all the guests, a spa day for the bridal party, a rehearsal dinner at a vineyard. The centerpiece of it all was her dress, a couture gown she had seen in a magazine, which, she informed me with a casual shrug, cost more than my first car. I listened, I nodded, I asked clarifying questions. "And what kind of music would you have? How many bridesmaids were you thinking?" Each question was a log on their bonfire of fantasy, making it burn brighter and hotter. They painted a picture of an event that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, a sum that could fund a small laboratory for years, a sum that could put a dozen students through college. As I listened, I wasn't angry anymore. I felt a strange, clinical detachment. I was a sociologist observing a foreign tribe with a bizarre set of rituals and values. They weren't talking about a marriage. They were talking about a production, a show, a statement to the world about their status, their taste, their importance. And I was being cast as the silent, off-stage producer, the one who provided the capital but took no bows. My father, emboldened by the champagne and the seemingly successful negotiation, finally got down to business. He pulled a pen from his pocket and started making notes on a napkin. "So, a rough estimate," he said, tapping the napkin. "For the venue, catering, travel, and the dress, we're probably looking at an initial investment from you of around $300,000. We can discuss incidentals later." Initial investment, the language of the boardroom. It was so perfectly, horribly him. Amelia looked at me, her face flushed with excitement and champagne. "Isn't it going to be the most beautiful wedding ever, Chloe? And it'll be all thanks to you." The room was quiet for a moment. The waiter hovered nearby, ready to take our order. The city lights twinkled outside the window. This was it, the moment of the reveal, the climax of the experiment. I took a slow sip of water, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat. I looked at the three of them, their faces expectant, triumphant. I had never felt more powerful in my life. I placed my water glass down on the white linen tablecloth with a soft, definitive click. The sound seemed to cut through the restaurant's ambient hum. I looked at my father, then my mother, and finally at Amelia. I let the silence stretch, just for a beat, savoring the last moment of their blissful ignorance. "No," I said. It was just one word. Quiet, calm, utterly immovable. Amelia blinked, her perfect smile faltering. What do you mean no?" She laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "That's not funny, Chloe." "I'm not paying for the wedding," I said, my voice gaining strength. I addressed all of them, my gaze moving from one shocked face to the next. "I will not be giving you $300,000 or any amount of money for this wedding." My father's face, which had been relaxed and smug, hardened into a mask of disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. We discussed this. This is for your sister." "I am being perfectly serious," I replied, my tone unwavering. "The Atherton grant is for my neurological research, and that is where it is going, all of it. As of last week, it is locked in a university endowment, and it cannot be touched for any other purpose." The color drained from my mother's face. You went behind our backs." "I protected my life's work," I corrected her gently. "There's a difference." Amelia just stared at me, her blue eyes wide with a dawning horror, as if I had just transformed into a monster before her very eyes. But my dream," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My Tuscan wedding. You said you made us think." "I said I had made a decision," I stated calmly. "And I have. I am not your benefactor. I am not your emergency fund. My success is not a slush fund for your fantasies. It is mine." For the first time in my life, I was not explaining. I was not justifying. I was not defending. I was declaring. The power dynamic in that family, a structure that had been fixed for nearly 3 decades, had just been shattered. The oak tree in the backyard had just refused to provide any more shade for the prize-winning rose bush. I felt a sense of liberation, so profound it was almost dizzying. They stared at me, sputtering, a mixture of rage and confusion warring on their faces. It was my father who found his voice first. "This is unacceptable," he seethed, his voice low and menacing. "After everything we've done for you, the selfishness, the sheer, unadulterated selfishness." "Selfishness?" I asked, a real, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that night. It felt wonderful. "You want to talk about selfishness? Let's talk about it. For my entire life, my accomplishments have been invisible to you unless they could somehow benefit Amelia. You didn't see my awards, my degrees, my work. You saw a future safety net. You saw a resource. You never once celebrated me for me." "That's not true," my mother cried, clutching her pearls in a gesture of high drama. "We love you. We've always been proud of you." "Were you proud of me at my PhD defense, Mom?" I asked, my voice still quiet, but now laced with steel. "You couldn't make it because you were helping Amelia pick out new curtains. Were you proud of me at my high school graduation, Dad? You missed my valedictorian speech to watch her in a mall fashion show. Were you proud of me when I won the Atherton grant? You couldn't even be bothered to send a text message. You don't get to claim pride in the harvest when you have never once tended the soil." Tears were streaming down Amelia's face now. "You're ruining my life," she sobbed. "You're doing this just to be cruel." "No, Leah," I said, and my voice softened with a flicker of pity for the woman-child sitting before me. "I'm not. Cruel would be to let you continue to believe that the world owes you everything. I'm just reallocating my resources." I reached into my purse and pulled out a simple, elegantly printed brochure. I slid it across the table. On the front, in clean, modern font, were the words, "The Albright Initiative." "This is where my money is going," I announced. "My personal savings, not the grant money. I have established a foundation. It will provide full university scholarships for underprivileged young women who want to pursue careers in science and technology. It's named after my middle school science teacher, who came to my science fair on a Saturday because he knew no one else would." I let that sink in. I was not just saying no to them. I was saying yes to a dozen other girls who were just like me. Girls who were smart and driven and probably overlooked. I was taking the love and support I had always craved from my family and giving it to strangers who actually needed it. I was building a new family, a chosen one, based on merit and mutual respect, not on the accident of birth. It was the most perfect, constructive, and psychologically satisfying revenge I could have ever imagined. The reaction was what psychologists call an extinction burst. When a behavior that has always been reinforced is suddenly no longer rewarded, the subject will often exhibit a frantic, exaggerated version of that behavior before giving up. My family, having failed with disbelief and guilt, escalated to pure, sputtering rage. My father was the first to explode. He threw his napkin on the table. "You are an ungrateful, spiteful child," he hissed, his face a mottled red. "To do this, to throw money away on strangers instead of helping your own sister, it's a disgrace. You are a disgrace to this family." "What family?" I asked calmly. "The one that only acknowledges my existence when they need something." My mother started to cry, not the quiet, manipulative tears from before, but loud, ugly, gasping sobs of pure fury. "How could you humiliate us like this? In public. You brought us to this fancy restaurant just to ambush us, to shame us. You are cruel, Chloe, a cold, cruel woman." Amelia was a volcano of incoherent rage and sorrow. "I hate you," she screamed, tears and mascara running down her face. People at other tables were starting to stare. "You were always jealous of me, always, and now you're punishing me for it. You're ruining the most important day of my life because you can't stand to see me happy." The accusation of jealousy was so old, so tired, and so utterly wrong that I almost laughed. I was never jealous of her. I was jealous of what she had. Not the attention, not the clothes, not the easy popularity. I was jealous of the simple, unwavering certainty that she was loved. The knowledge, which she had never had to question, that if she fell, her parents would be there to catch her. That was a luxury I had never known. But I didn't say any of that. There was no point. They couldn't hear me. They would never be able to hear me. They were trapped in a narrative they had written for themselves, and in that story I was the villain. I stood up from the table. The waiters were now openly starring, one of them hovering nervously nearby. I took out my wallet and placed several $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover the champagne and any food they might have ordered. "This is the last money you will ever receive from me," I said, my voice clear and steady above the chaos. "This is the end of my debt." I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, my back straight, my head held high. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with a rage that could have powered the city. I could hear Amelia still sobbing, my mother calling my name in a tone of shocked betrayal. I didn't look back. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool night air, it felt like I was breaking the surface of the water after holding my breath for a very, very long time. The city sounds, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of people on the sidewalk, rushed in to fill the silence that my family had left. I walked down the street with no particular destination in mind, and I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, not yet. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. The laugh of a prisoner who has just tunneled her way to freedom. The immense, crushing weight of their expectations, a burden I had carried on my shoulders for 29 years, was gone. I felt so light I thought I might float away. Of course, there was pain. A deep, aching grief for the family I wished I had, the family I had tried so hard to earn. Cutting them off was like amputating a limb. It was a necessary act of survival, but it left a phantom pain, a raw and tender wound where something used to be. I knew there would be lonely holidays, birthdays without a single call, a future devoid of the familiar, if painful, landmarks of my past. But underneath the grief, there was something else, something new and powerful. It was the feeling of a blank page. The thrilling, terrifying realization that for the first time in my life, my story was entirely my own to write. I had no one to please, no one to prove myself to. My future was a pristine, unwritten territory, and I was the sole cartographer. The inheritance they had planned for me was one of obligation and guilt. The inheritance I was giving myself was freedom. Months that followed were a study in contrasts. On the one hand, there was the silence. My family followed through on their outrage. My number was blocked. My emails went unanswered. When I sent Amelia a simple, civil card for her birthday, it was returned to me, unopened with "return to sender" scrawled across the front in my mother's angry handwriting. I heard through a distant cousin that she had gotten married, a much smaller, locally funded affair. I wasn't invited. The amputation was complete. But on the other hand, my life began to fill up with sound. The excited chatter of my research team as we unpacked new equipment purchased with the grant money. The enthusiastic emails from university administrators about the flood of applications for the first round of Albright Initiative scholarships. The warm, encouraging weekly coffee meetings with Eris, who had become a true friend and confidant. The launch party for the Albright Initiative was held in a modest lecture hall at the university, not a Tuscan villa. There were no string quartets, just a playlist of classic rock I had made on my laptop. The food was cheese cubes and cheap sparkling wine, not a 5-course gourmet meal. But the room was filled with a joy so genuine and so powerful it felt sacred. The first 5 scholarship recipients were there. 5 brilliant, hungry, hopeful young women, their eyes shining with a future that had, just a few months ago, been out of reach. One of them, a fiercely intelligent girl from a rural town named Maya, gave a short speech. She talked about how she had always dreamed of being an astrophysicist, but never thought her family could afford it. She talked about how this scholarship wasn't just about the money, it was about someone believing in her. To know that someone I've never even met saw my potential, it makes me want to work harder than ever, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down. I looked out at those 5 young faces, and I saw myself. The lonely girl with her lima beans, the invisible valedictorian, the college student eating alone in the dining hall. I had done it. I had built a time machine. I couldn't go back and save myself, but I could build a future where girls like me didn't need saving. I could be the person I had needed all those years ago. Eris stood beside me, clinking his plastic cup of wine against mine. Look at what you built, Chloe, he said, his voice full of a pride more real and more meaningful than any I had ever heard from my own father. Not a bad little experiment, huh? I was no longer a solitary planet, orbiting a cold and distant sun. I was the center of a new constellation, a growing galaxy of smart, powerful women, and it was more beautiful than any Tuscan sunset. It's been a year now. My research is thriving. The Albright Initiative has just selected its second round of scholars. My life is quiet, but it is full. It's full of purpose, of friendship, of the deep, abiding satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful out of your own pain. I don't hate my family. I think in their own deeply flawed and narcissistic way, they thought they loved me. But their love was conditional. It was transactional. It was a currency I was no longer willing to earn. I have come to accept that we were speaking different languages. They were speaking the language of obligation, of debt, of what they were owed. I was trying to speak the language of love, of support, of being seen. We were never going to understand each other. Sometimes, late at night in the lab, when an experiment finally works, I have a fleeting impulse to call them, to share the news. The habit of seeking their approval is a ghost that still haunts the edges of my mind. But it's fading. It's being replaced by the faces of my students, the respect of my colleagues, the quiet pride I feel when I look at what I've built. My revenge was not a fiery, destructive act. It was an act of creation. I took the inheritance they tried to give me, an inheritance of guilt and obligation and invisibility, an inheritance of dust, and I used it as fertilizer. I planted a garden for other people, and in doing so, I finally learned how to bloom myself. The hardest lesson to learn is that you can't choose the family you're born into, but you can choose what you build, who you lift up, and what legacy you leave behind. You can choose to create a family of spirit, a family of purpose. And that choice, that power, has been worth more than any grant, and more freeing than any approval I ever sought. So let me ask you all this. If you had the chance to turn your biggest wound into your greatest strength, what would you build? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, you know what to do. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Thank you for listening.